Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here, and welcome back to another video for God of War. If you guys saw my real life God of War vlog yesterday, then you'll already know that I had a chance to go hands-on with a game in Norway, and if you missed that video, then I'll link it down below for you to check out. But since that trip, I've had a chance to sit down at home and play even more of the game for an extended period of time. I haven't finished it just yet, but I got to the point where I felt like sharing my initial impressions with you guys, because this game, from what I've played thus far, is fantastic. I'm going to preface this by saying that I have not played every God of War game in the series. I've played some of them, so I know what it's about, and I've experienced some of what the series has to offer. But to be completely honest, while the previous games have had some incredible moments, they just didn't click with me. That's not to say they were bad games, because they weren't. They were great titles, but each to their own. However, this new God of War, this had me hooked from the very beginning of the game. So let me first start by saying, whether you're a God of War fan or not, this is for sure a game you definitely want to check out, be that for the meaty, action-focused gameplay, the vast world full of hidden treasures and mysteries to uncover, or the deep Norse mythology-filled story. If any of that sounds even remotely interesting to you, then you're going to want to check out God of War. Now, before I go any further, I want to reassure you that there will be absolutely no spoilers in this video. This is a game that should be experienced personally, and as such, I'm going to keep any sort of story mentions incredibly light, bar a very quick synopsis to set the scene. And any gameplay you see will largely be taken from the very beginning of the game, so all the exciting boss encounters and places that you'll explore, all of that can remain untouched for you to experience yourself. Of course, if you do enjoy this video, then a like would be super appreciated, and be sure to let me know in the comments down below if you guys are looking forward to the game and whether you're a fan of the original series, or if you're coming to this one completely fresh. Now, let's start at the very top. Let me very quickly set the scene so that we're all on the same page. Where the previous entries in the series saw Kratos taking on the Greek gods, this new God of War shifts focus to Norway and the Norse gods. Many years have passed since Kratos took his vengeance against the Olympian gods, and after surviving his encounter with his father, Zeus, Kratos now lives with his young son, Arekkz, in the woods of the Norse gods. This is a savage land inhabited by ferocious monsters, beasts and warriors. However, not only does Kratos have to contend with all of that, but he's now got to assume the father and mentor role as he teaches his son to survive in this harsh world. However, as you'll find out pretty early on, the Norse gods don't take kindly to outsiders, and as such, it won't be long before you realise that the journey ahead might not be as straightforward as you'd hoped. Now, that's as much as I'm going to say on the story front, because in a game like this, part of the magic, the enjoyment, comes from the characters and the bosses that you encounter. If you know anything about Norse mythology, then you may already have some ideas, but either way, I'll leave that for you to uncover. I will say that's probably one of the factors that made this game click with me much more than previous titles, since I've always been much more interested in Norse mythology than I have Greek. So setting-wise, this game just appeals to me much more. Now, this new God of War is a pretty big departure from previous titles, introducing some pretty drastic changes. It was rebuilt from the ground up, and very early on in development, the team were told that nothing was sacred, and that pretty much everything could be changed. The camera, in previous games, it was a more zoomed out, fixed cinematic camera that gave you a much greater field of view, which worked well with the way that you moved around the stages. But this new God of War instead adopts a much closer, over-the-shoulder free camera. This makes for a more personal, intimate story and experience, and in turn makes you feel much more like you are in the action as opposed to spectating it. The game also features this continuous camera for pretty much all cutscenes. It's a technique not typically used in games. In fact, it's my understanding that God of War may have been one of the first games that's done this, but instead of cutting between characters in cutscenes, the camera freely moves, meaning that everything is essentially one continuous cut. At times you might not notice it too much, but in some of the action sequences where the camera literally runs from one place to the next, you really appreciate this new way of telling the story. Additionally, jumping, a staple movement mechanic of the previous games, has been ripped out, and now you're much more rooted to the ground. There are still contextual jumps where you can leap across ledges, but you won't be bunny hopping in combat. Part of the reason behind this was the new camera. Since it's much closer, the jumping would have resulted in a more dizzying experience, but it also goes hand in hand with the combat, which is much more action RPG than it is hack and slash. But it's honestly not something that I missed. I, for one, am someone that loves jumping in games. I'm a Nintendo kid at heart, and jumping is usually what I do. But honestly, I didn't feel like it was missing in this new God of War. There were no situations where I felt like I would have benefited from the ability to freely jump. So if the thought of it no longer being present concerns you, rest assured, it doesn't in any way hinder the experience. Now, let's talk about combat. Since this is something that stands out as an exceptional aspect of the game. Where combat in previous games is much more akin to that of a hack and slash, you use your powerful weapons and combos to literally rip through enemies, which is exactly what you'd expect of a god. However, this new God of War instead adopts a much more action RPG focused approach to combat. Your attacks are slower, more weighty, deliberate, and you honestly feel every single hit. While there's no question that you are still an exceptionally powerful god, in this new, unfamiliar land, it's almost fitting that you're a little more thoughtful in the way that you fight. There's a very noticeable weight to combat, and even when you're fighting the simple Drogo, which are essentially your trash mobs, even slicing through them feels meaty, and that applies to both attacks with the axe and your bare hands. And speaking of the axe, let's touch on that very quickly. Gone are the signature chain blades of old, enter the Leviathan Axe, a powerful magical axe capable of having magical abilities imbued into it in the form of runes. This will be your main weapon throughout the game, as well as your trusty tool for solving puzzles and opening pathways. Your basic attacks come in the form of light and heavy attacks, but on top of that you can throw the axe and call it back of your own accord. Unlike most projectile weapons, the Leviathan Axe isn't thrown and then automatically returned to you. You can, at the press of a button, call it back, meaning you can throw it strategically in battle and then position yourself so as to catch your targets on the way back. I find myself throwing it at enemies in the distance, then attacking the closer enemies with my bare hands and calling it back through as many of them as possible. It's simple yet hugely satisfying at the same time. And also, now nobody can ever say that I have bad aim or I miss my target, because I'll simply turn around and tell them I was leaving my axe there so that I could line up a nice return hit. Now, early on, your combos are pretty limited, but the game also has a ton of progression options too. I'm going to keep this segment light, since this is again something I want to let you discover for yourself, but as you progress through the game and earn XP, collect items, you'll be able to unlock more skills, upgrade your weapons, your armor, imbue items with runes for magical abilities, so combat really does open up and does give you some truly devastating moves to play with. And you're going to need them later on, because while some of the early encounters are pretty straightforward, you will find some challenges not long after. Of course, on top of swinging your axe and punching enemies in the face, you also have your wrist-mounted Captain America-like shield. This can be used for simple blocking functionality, but also to counter if you block your attacks at the right time. So this again ties back into the much more deliberate combat. While slower paced, everything just feels so much more satisfying to land and pull off. So on the combat front, the new God of War is, without question, incredibly good. You do of course have your son accompanying you on your journey, and he too can aid you in battle, and honestly, he's actually a pretty handy companion. If you've played enough games, then you likely sigh at the thought of having to escort some kind of dopey companion along on your journey, since they invariably get in the way, get themselves killed, or get you killed. But Atreus, for a kid, he's actually pretty cool. From a narrative point of view, it reveals a more thoughtful, caring side of Kratos, whilst also being reserved and somewhat afraid to commit to his emotions, but in combat, he tends to just do his own thing, and you won't very often have to bail him out. You can issue basic commands at the press of a button to have him distract or shoot at enemies, which can either be used to stun them, or for bigger boss encounters it can actually draw their focus away from you, so despite my initial concerns, he's actually a pretty chill companion to have. In fact, a lot of the time when I'm getting stuck into the combat, I tend to just forget he's there, he does his own thing, and then we kind of complete the fight like that. So as companions go, he's not really that annoying. Outside of that, the exploration and the worlds are just fantastic. For me, when I play games, I sort of straddle the exploration line. Some games I feel the need to explore every corner and smash every pot. Meanwhile, other games I tend to follow the golden line a little bit more and just experience the story. Such is the way when you cover games on YouTube. Sometimes time is limited and it's far more important to get to the end than it is to find that last hidden coin. However, in God of War, despite my best efforts to try and stay on track and follow the story, I just couldn't help myself going off the beaten track to explore every little passageway and every hidden corner. I found myself playing God of War like I play Zelda. I deliberately work out which way that I need to go, and then I turn around and go the opposite way to explore everything else before progressing. Of course, in doing so, you're rewarded. There are chests everywhere, items to collect, materials, money, all things that will be useful as you upgrade later on, so it really does pay to explore, and the world is so intriguing and mysterious that you really owe it to yourself to take the time to look around. You don't have to explore, you can just run straight through, but you'll honestly be missing a huge chunk of the game if you don't at least have a little look around. And it's that aspect of the game that will undoubtedly lead to plenty of replay value. I imagine I'll likely hit a point where I just want to rush to the end and see what happens in the story, at which point I'll then likely be tempted to go back and play the game again and find everything, if I have time. Again, going back to the mention of Norse mythology, a topic that interests me, being able to set foot in this world, explore it, and meet some of the characters I've been reading about, I feel like I'm getting so much more out of this experience than I ever did from previous games. In fact, on my recent trip to Norway, I read the book on Norse mythology by Neil Gaiman, and already I'm meeting some of the characters that I read about. So yeah, I'm definitely loving this world that I'm a part of. But for the time being, my friends, that's pretty much it from me. I don't want to ramble on too long, and in truth, I kind of just want to get back to playing more of the game. But those are my initial impressions from my time with the game thus far. For those of you that want to see more, I'll have some extended gameplay going up on the channel next week once we get a little bit closer to launch. But until then, thank you very much for watching, take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.